Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. On the 11th anniversary of his assassination, Turkish-Armenian journalist Hrant Dink was commemorated today outside his former office in Istanbul's Şişli district. Hrant Dink, the founder and chief editor of the Turkish-Armenian weekly newspaper Agos, was gunned down on January 19, 2007, outside the then office of the newspaper. Before the start of the commemoration ceremony, police closed off the Halaskar Gazi Avenue and its side streets. During the ceremony, crowds chanted "Justice for Hrant" and "We are all Armenians" outside the former Agos office. According to a fresh report by Reuters, Turkish artillery fired into Syria's Afrin region earlier today in a military campaign against the Kurdish-controlled area.
The tension in Afrin is escalating. According to Reuters, Turkish artillery fired into Syria's Afrin region earlier today in what Ankara said was the start of a military campaign against the Kurdish-controlled area. The reports came shortly after Al Jazeera announced that Russia has started moving its observer troops away from the region. Earlier in the day, Turkey's defense minister Nurettin Canikli told the reporters that the operation will happen. All terrorist lines in northern Syria will be eradicated. There is no other way, Canikli said. In a short visit to Moscow on Thursday, Turkey's military chief, Hulusi Akar, discussed a possible air campaign in the region. "We will intervene in Afrin," Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu told broadcaster CNN Türk, adding that he did not expect Russia to oppose any operation there. "We are meeting the Russians and Iran on the use of airspace." The Afrin operation came to the top of Turkey's political agenda after the media reports revealing a US plan to create a local army predominantly made up of YPG-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces. YPG is considered a terrorist organization by Ankara. In a press briefing on Thursday, the US State Department urged Turkey not to take any action in northern Syria, calling on Ankara to remain focused on the fight against ISIS. US State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert told the reporter that US wanted Turkey to abstain from violence in the city of Afrin.
Joining us from Arezzo, Italy tonight to talk about Turkey's possible military operation in northern Syria and the current state of the relations between the Syrian Kurds and major powers is Professor Joshua Landis, who is the head of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Good evening, Professor Landis. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Pleasure being with you.
So, Professor, the news of the U.S. getting ready to set up a border force on Turkey's border with Syria, comprising mainly of YPG-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces, stunned Ankara this week, it would be fair to say. So how do you make sense of this decision by Washington? Does this mean that the U.S. is now done with Turkey?
Well, clearly relations are going to a new chapter. Turkey had been hoping that the United States would stay true to its word and leave northern Syria after ISIS and the caliphate was destroyed. But recently, we've been hearing from Washington and Secretary of State Tillerson in specific, just recently in a long interview, that the United States is going to stay there for the indefinite future. It's going to stay there for a number of reasons. One is to make sure that ISIS doesn't come back. But two is to make sure that there is democratic change in Syria, that refugees return. There is a long laundry list of reasons that he gave for United States staying in northern Syria. And there was talk about building a 30,000 strong border guard. Now, most recently, Tillerson said, that's not true. This has been misunderstood. We're just going to do what we've always been doing. But the fact remains, America is staying in northern Syria and is going to continue to help the Kurds in northern Syria get arms, train, and become stronger.
And Professor Landis, let's talk a bit about Tillerson's recent remarks that you just also talked about. So on his way back from Canada, he said that what's been going on has been misportrayed and that the US actually had no intention of building a border force on Turkey's border with Syria. How do you make sense of this move by Tillerson? Is this a retreat or simply a stunt?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and we don't really know the answer to that yet. We're waiting to find out. You know, he said border guard was the wrong defining word to use for it. But the fact of the matter is that they're training these, what they call the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are largely made up of the PYD, to get arms, to defend themselves, and to police the region. And of course, this kind of police force can be used against ISIS, but it can be used against anybody else as well.
So, Professor Landis, you published an article on your Syria comment blog earlier this week on the U.S. policy towards Kurds and Turkey. And one of the important arguments in that recent piece was that the U.S. seems to be trying to make its presence and its cooperation with the Kurds in Syria permanent, seemingly in an attempt to roll back Iran. How sustainable do you think is this kind of a policy?
Well, that's an important question. Many people, many analysts say it's not sustainable, that the next administration will not want to stay in Syria, that it will be costly, that it's going to get America in a long and stupid fight with Turkey, as well as with Syria and Iran, all for what? For a hunk of land that's badly blown up in northern Syria? But the fact of the matter is that this administration is setting the bar very high. It's laid out a long agenda of American foreign policy aims, which is to change the regime in Syria, to destroy ISIS, to help the Kurds, to form a new Syria, really. And if the next administration in 3 years comes along and says, oh, we don't want to do that, and I'm taking all these soldiers away, and we're not going to use the American Air Force, then by that time, 3 years later, the Kurds of northern Syria are going to be very dependent on the United States. They're going to have built up a force. They're going to have their schools, their institutions, and America will be destroying all those. And that will be very difficult because the Republicans, if it is a Democratic president, will turn around and say, you are destroying America's foreign policy, you're weak, you're helping America's enemies, you're helping Russia, you're helping Iran. So it'll be very difficult, I think, for the next administration to climb down from this difficult position that President Trump is putting the United States in.
Professor Landis, another important point in your recent piece is that Washington right now is promoting Kurdish nationalism in Syria, and you also contend that this isn't beneficial for any of the actors concerned. And instead, you argue that the U.S. should rather be helping the PYD to negotiate a deal with the government of Bashar Assad to promote everybody's interests. So my question to you is, in what ways do you think the Assad government and the Kurds' interests are aligned? What can come out of this cooperation?
Well, there is a deal to be made in the north of Syria. After all, the Kurds have conquered all this region north of the Euphrates. Much of that region is the Arab-majority region. Some of it is. Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, other cities along the Euphrates. But it has much of the oil of Syria. Over 50% of the oil is in that region. The best agricultural land is in that region. The dam, Tabqa Dam, that controls the Euphrates River and produces much of Syria's electricity in that region. So Assad needs access to those resources. Both the Kurds in Syria worry about Turkey more than they worry about each other. They need the trade for those resources to be used. So there is a deal to be made. Now, of course, policing it would be very difficult because, as we all know, Assad wants to assert his authority 100% in every corner of Syria. And so the Kurds are frightened, legitimately so, that he will just come in and destroy everything that they've set up. on the other hand, that's something that America can weigh in on. But if they set up a separate Kurdistan in northern Syria, America is going to be stuck in northern Syria because Turkey is furious, Syria is furious, international law goes against it. And if there isn't a deal that's recognized, Turkey, Syria, and the Kurds, that accommodates the interests of the three countries, there will be a future war. And that's the problem, that America, by sticking its hand on the scales and pushing the scales down, is creating a situation where it has to stay there for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. And finally, let's actually not finally, but penultimately, let's come to Turkey's possible or perhaps ongoing, according to reports, operation in Afrin. In the same piece, you wrote that it's not clear what Erdogan can get out of a military operation in Afrin, and that this could, in fact, perhaps be a preparation for the upcoming presidential elections next year in 2019. So from a foreign policy perspective, how meaningful is it for Turkey to enter Afrin? Or, as you've written, should this move rather be seen from a domestic politics perspective?
Well, I think it serves both purposes. It's quite clear that Erdogan is very upset, as many Turks are, at America's stated goal of staying in the north and arming the PYD. Now, Erdogan doesn't want the United States to do that. Erdogan wants the United States to pay attention to Turkey's interests, which the United States is clearly not doing in this situation. So by attacking Afrin, or at least threatening to attack Afrin, this forces the United States to make certain concessions. And we've already seen Secretary of State Tillerson say, well, we're not setting up a border guard. We don't know the reality of that, but he's on the phone negotiating. But what would Turkey gain by conquering Afrin? They'll be occupying hundreds of thousands of Kurds who will carry out operations against them. It's going to get Syria further mired in, it's going to get, Turkey further mired in a Syrian quicksand. And this is a dangerous position for Erdogan. On the other hand, he's boxed himself into a corner by stating that he's going to invade, moving all the tanks down there. We've seen a situation where it looks very difficult for him to withdraw and not to invade, unless America makes some important concessions. And this is where, hopefully, the United States and Russia are both on the phone to Ankara, and that they're making some kind of a deal that will calm the situation down.
Before we conclude, I'd like to ask a final question, with your permission, about the current Russian influence in Afrin. What, in your opinion, is going on in terms of the Russian-Kurdish cooperation in Afrin at the moment? In other words, is Russia trying not to lose the Kurds to the US?
Well, Russia doesn't, Russia wants to be the mediator in this situation, and it's set itself up to be the controlling, really, superpower in the northern Middle East. And this is where the contest between the United States and Russia really comes down to, can Russia stop Turkey? If Turkey insists to go ahead, it's unclear that Russia will move against Turkey. It might do it. It depends on what happens in these negotiations, I think. Because if Russia abandons the Kurds, it'll look weak. So this is a tense situation where the United States will look weak, Russia will look weak, and that is some reason for Turkey to move ahead and do this, because it wants to establish the fact that both these powers, Russia and the United States, have to pay attention to Turkey's concerns, and they have to take its considerations and its strategic interests into account. And it's quite clear that the United States has been moving ahead without really consulting Turkey and without taking Turkey seriously. And that's one of the worrying factors in this whole episode. is that the United States no longer seems to look at Turkey as a strategic partner, and it has been pushing Turkey into the arms of Russia by increasingly supporting Kurdish nationalism and moving forces into northern Syria and using northern Syria as its leverage in the region. And that's the real contest here. Turkey does not want the United States to do that. And we'll see how this ends up. It looks like we're really reaching a peak of tension here in the next few days.
Thank you very much, Professor Landis, for your comments and for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to be on your show.
Following the election of Canan Kaftancıoğlu as CHP's Istanbul provincial chair on Sunday, a probe was opened against her over a number of social media posts.
President Erdogan has slammed main opposition Republican People's Party, CHP's newly elected Istanbul provincial chair Canan Kaftancıoğlu, over a number of old tweets, explaining that Kaftancıoğlu's tweets display an enmity of the nation. Kaftancıoğlu was elected as CHP's Istanbul provincial chair on January 14th, becoming the first woman elected to the post. To insult our nation's values, history and culture is not politics. Its name can only be enmity of the nation, Erdogan said on Tuesday in the AKP's group meeting in the Turkish parliament. On the same day of her election, a terror propaganda investigation was opened against her based on a number of social media posts accusing her of carrying out propaganda for the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK and Revolutionary People's Liberation Front DHKPC. She is also accused of insulting the president and demeaning the state of the Turkish Republic. Following the news of the investigation, Kaftancıoğlu defended herself on Twitter. "I'm a doctor and a mother. As someone who has devoted her entire life to the human rights struggle, I have always condemned terrorism and terrorist organizations," she wrote. On Wednesday, during the handover ceremony at the CHP's Istanbul headquarters, Kaftancıoğlu apologized for sharing a picture that included an open insult to the president's mother during the 2013 Gezi Park protests. "We are all human beings and we make mistakes. Motherhood is blessed and I don't condone insulting mothers," Kaftancıoğlu told reporters. During the handover ceremony, Kaftancıoğlu also stated that her party is ready to start the big Istanbul march to win local elections in March 2019. "We will launch our march from 39 Istanbul districts. That's why they are scared. They are trying to steer the CHP, but the CHP was founded to fight imperialism," she said.
US-based NGO Freedom House has downgraded Turkey's status from partly free to not free.
According to US-based non-governmental organization Freedom House's Freedom in the World 2018 report, Turkey's rank has been reduced from partly free to not free. Turkey's status has fallen under the not free category for the first time in the history of the report. The report ruled that Turkey's political rights rating had declined from 4 to 5, and its civil liberties rating has declined from 5 to 6. Specifically referring to the deeply flawed April 2017 referendum, the report also drew attention to the mass dismissal of state employees, the mass replacement of elected mayors with government appointees, arbitrary prosecutions of rights activists, and other perceived enemies of the state. Criticizing the developments since the July 2016 coup attempt and the ongoing state of emergency rule, Freedom House noted that using emergency powers and vaguely worded terrorism laws, the authorities have suspended or dismissed more than 110,000 people from public sector positions and arrested more than 60,000 others by the year's end. The report describes the situation in Turkey as follows. Since the attempted coup, at least 1,500 civil society organizations have been summarily closed and their property confiscated. The prosecution of journalists and closure of media outlets continues. Arrests based on messages shared via social media are common, leading to widespread self-censorship and the general chilling effect on political discourse, it added, also highlighting the arrest of Osman Kavala, describing him as perhaps Turkey's most prominent civil society leader.
Jailed journalists Ahmet Altan and Şahin Alpay remained under arrest for another week following a controversial decision by the local courts.
The Constitutional Court had ruled last week that Mehmet Altan's and Şahin Alpay's right to personal freedom and security and their freedom of expression and press have been violated. Altan and Alpay are prominent journalists who have been in prison for more than a year. The Constitutional Court had decided to send Alpay's file to Istanbul 13th Heavy Penal Court and Altan's file to the 26th Heavy Penal Court. The two journalists' lawyers demanded their clients' release following the highest court's decision. However, the local courts ordered on January 12th that the journalists should remain under arrest until the details of the Constitutional Court's ruling are published in the official gazette. In a move that could be considered as a reply to the local courts, the Constitutional Court's official Twitter account has stated that the fully detailed rulings are available on the top court's website. Today, the Constitutional Court's reasoned judgment was published in the official gazette. Altan and Alpay were jailed in the aftermath of the 2016 coup attempt. They have been accused of links to terrorist groups and attempting to overthrow the government. On Wednesday, Harlem Desir, Freedom of the Media representative of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, sent a letter to Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu demanding the release of the two arrested journalists. This refusal to implement the Constitutional Court decision is of grave concern, as it is related to the freedom of individuals, in that case of two journalists. It seriously infringes upon their rights, including freedom of expression and freedom to work as journalists, which should be protected by the rule of law, Desir said in his letter. Osman Can, a law professor and former rapporteur of the Constitutional Court, commented on the court's decision for Medyascope this week. We have to say this very clearly. If there is a violation determined by the Constitutional Court, it is not jurisdictionally possible for a local court to maintain a stance which disobeys the Constitutional Court's decision. According to the Constitution and the law on the Constitutional Court, there is no judicial discretion entitled to courts of first instance. These courts are not authorized to evaluate, assess, criticize, or disobey the decision of the Constitutional Court. It is certain that there is a seizure of authority and a violation of law here. We cannot discuss this issue jurisdictionally.
Barcelona's Turkish midfielder Arda Turan will join Başakşehir Football Club on loan for 2.5 seasons.
Turkish Super League leader Istanbul Başakşehir Football Club officially announced that an agreement to sign midfielder Arda Turan on loan from Barcelona has finally been reached. Over the last 2 seasons, Başakşehir has managed to rise rapidly to rival the well-known Istanbul teams of Beşiktaş, Fenerbahçe and Galatasaray. The Istanbul club reached an agreement with Barcelona on a 2.5-year loan with an optional extra year, as reported by the Turkish Radio and Television Corporation, TRT, and Hürriyet Daily. Arda Turan is returning to his country wearing the orange kit of Başakşehir. This is not just a transfer for Başakşehir, but a transfer for all of Turkey, the football club's president Göksel Gümüşdağ said in a statement. 30-year-old football player Arda Turan first joined the Spanish team in 2015 after 4 successful seasons with Atletico Madrid, but never got to hold down a first-team place.
Now let's take a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Tricky will be on Babylon's stage tonight. Adrian Nicholas Matthews Thawes, better known by his stage name Tricky, is an English record producer, vocalist and musician. Born and raised in Bristol, he began his career as an early collaborator of Massive Attack before embarking on a solo career with his debut album, Maxine in 1995. Tricky released his latest album, On Uniform, in September last year. Isolé is set to warm up Mini Music Hall tonight. Born in Frankfurt as Raiko Müller, Isolé lived with his family in Algeria throughout his childhood and attended a French primary school before returning to Frankfurt with his family. His musical journey started after he gave a tape to his friend and DJ Andreas Andy Baumecker, the owner of Freundinnen Records. Isolé is best known by his album Rest. This weekend, Beykoz Kundra is screening a selection of winter-themed movies under the title Karlar Altında Kabuslar, or Nightmares Under the Snow. Groundhog Day, The Shining and The Thing will be on tomorrow, starting from 3 p.m. The screenings will be followed by DJ Hünkar's performance from 11:30 p.m. onwards. Established in 1810 as a leather factory, the facility was named Sümerbank Leather and Shoe Factory in 1933. It continued its leather and shoe production until 1999. After its privatization in 2005, the the facility was named Beykoz Kundura. Thanks to its well-preserved historical setting, it later evolved into a movie set popular among Turkey's film and television industries.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.